金危険を知っていた方です。それは運命みたいなものだって。
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Danny here. Today I'm talking to you about Tokyo Ghoul RE. So before we get into any of this, just to let you know there's going to be some spoilers for the first series Tokyo Ghoul that we didn't talk about on the last episode. So let's just get into that real quick. Where we see the ending of that series is, to my surprise, the death of Kaneki as he's defeated by the #1 investigator from the CCG. And it's also implied that he got turned into a Kinkei, which is the weapons that the CCG use from dead ghouls who use their Kaganes. And that's their way to really get even on the playing field. And then it ends with investigator Akira, who is at her father's grave. And then we see the new investigator under her wings, which is Heisei. And that's where it ends there. And then we jump into here with a 2-year time skip. So alright guys, yeah, Tokyo Ghoul RE is of course written and drawn by Sui Ishida. And this came out in 2014, shortly after the first series, like I mentioned before. And ended in 2018 with a whopping total of 181 chapters. And man, the one thing I could definitely say about this series is it is dense. There is so much to process when you're reading this series. It's crazy. And back in the previous episode, I mentioned, yeah, the first series is cool. It's mainly just set up for the next section, which is RE. And man, it really was, because now we're really diving deep into what this whole story is about and where our characters are leading into. So in the beginning, we see, like I said, our new character Heisei. He is the main protagonist now, part of the CCG unit, and they've created a new faction called QXs, I think. The Qs for short, and this is an experiment. After figuring out what Kaneki was, they find out that he was a human that got implanted with a ghoul organ, so that way he can turn into a one-eyed ghoul. And so they wanted to implement this, but in a safer way, so there's limitations to where these new people are still considered human, but they have Kaganes and they are stronger than normal, but they can eat food normally. And they don't really get into detail about it, but I'm assuming that they could just go back down to 0, right? It's all about the RC levels in their cells, and those are the things that determine if you're a ghoul or not. Ghouls usually have hundreds more than the average person does. And so by putting these limiters, they could still be considered human. And at first, for me, I was thinking this is a lot right off the bat. It's very fast. It's really introducing all of these new characters. It does the thing, of course, where we get a quick synopsis of the world. It talks about ghouls and all of that, what the CCG is, where it could grab newer people coming into the series. And again, it's really pushing hard with all of these new characters that are part of this team that Heisei is leading. And we don't see any familiar faces for a good while. In the first half of Tokyo Ghoul, it was all about the perspective of Kaneki and what he thinks about ghouls, so we never got a lot of exploration about the CCG and what goes on in there. We just had enough information to understand how the organization works, the structure, and some key characters that were important at that time. And then now here, it's all about the CCG. It's about Heisei and exactly what's going on with him. And of course, we do find out later that Heisei is actually Kaneki, who's lost his memory and was taken in and is now an investigator at the CCG. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense why they kind of look alike. But, you know, without him wearing the eye patch and with his hair being different, it was enough mystery to keep you interested. Like, okay, why is this character so special? And then after getting the reveal and going through more of the series, you really understand what Tokyo Ghoul is all about. And it's really about self-identity and your purpose. That's the whole thing about Kaneki, is he's trying to understand who he is now after he's become a half ghoul, half human person. Where does he belong in the world? And what is he going to do? He slowly gets these responsibilities and he has this power within him. And him constantly going through the struggle of what he needs to do and just all the things that are breaking him mentally, going through these insane situations. That's really the core of the series here. And we definitely see that with the world as well, right? The struggle of ghouls in the first half and the struggle of the CCG here in RE. Is all of this worth it at the end of the day is what a lot of characters say, because again, there is a lot of death in this series, more than I was really expecting, but it makes sense with how heavy the tone is and exactly what Ishida is trying to portray here. A very dark, twisted, tragic story between humanity and the ghouls. And I think that's the best part of the story here. Unfortunately, because it's a shonen series, we have to get to the point where there is a main protagonist, which we kind of thought it was with Dr. Kano, but that sort of deviates into its own story and purpose. And then eventually we come in and we get a new main antagonist, and his objective is more about the world itself of Tokyo Ghoul, rather than just our main characters Kaneki having to deal with conflict. But, you know, they do eventually have to cross paths with both of their goals. So it makes sense that the new antagonist is the new antagonist. And again, the writing is solid here. All the new characters, you know, it did feel like a lot in the beginning because, like, we have to introduce everybody now. You have to get all their personalities in, the relationships and the conflicts that we have with all of these people. But eventually, once we get past that, we could slow down a bit and really dig into the characters and all the hardships they have to go through. All of that is really fantastic. You could feel the emotions in the writing. And again, Ishida showing us how night and day this world can be is really fantastic. Because we have characters who have it pretty good and are just here because of circumstance. And then we have characters who just have tragic backstories. And of course, it mainly pertains to ghouls, but sometimes it doesn't. And then we see the downward spiral of certain characters and how insane they go. And that's because they're a product of the world they're in, or just the shitty situation that they grew up in. It's really fantastic. And I think it's to show the balance in between the ghouls and humanity. Because again, ghouls are depicted as demonic beings, and there's really nothing good about them. And that humanity are the good guys. But then as we see here, there's a lot of situations that our main characters and support cast see that starts to open their eyes or make them question exactly what they're doing with these sympathetic ghouls, and just seeing that actually they're people too. It's just a problem that they have to eat human meat. And then on the human side, it's like, oh, actually, I'm very conflicted because of how I grew up. That wasn't the ghouls' fault. That's just where I was in, and I blamed it on the ghouls anyway. Or it was involved with the ghouls, but you're conflicted with yourself because of all the good times you had with them, but you know in your head that, no, this isn't right. This isn't how it should be. This is not what we're told. And of course, what's the one thing that you're expecting when you're reading the series is the big turning point where Heisei reverts back into Kaneki and goes back into the fold with all the characters that he left behind 2 years ago in the first series. And the buildup was great. It's again with the writing that Ishida's doing about a breakdown of a character mentally and trying to repair it, even though it's all a jumbled mess, a lot of broken pieces, and you're just trying to come back together and understand exactly what's going on. A lot of fear and anxiety that's portrayed in Heisei's life leading up to the moment where he decides that he needs to become Kaneki again. And it's at that turning point where we pick up where Kaneki left off back in Tokyo Ghoul before he got stopped by the CCG. His goal was to have humanity and the ghouls come to an understanding with each other so that way they could coexist in society. And when we get to that moment here in Tokyo Ghoul RE, we just go to another level, and again, it's really solid stuff. All the build-up, all the emotions we're feeling with our characters, it's great. And sure, the fight scenes are cool. They're choreographed very well. The way they use the Kaganes and the Kinkeis are really great and unique, but you're really here for the characters. There's a lot of time invested into building them up, shaping exactly who they are. That's really all I kind of really care about for the most part, is unraveling these broken characters, building up this story. You know, like I said in the first part where like the slice of life stuff, I actually could have used more of that before we got more into the heavy shonen stuff and Kaneki leading these ghouls into this inevitable war that might happen. The main reason I wanted more of the slice of life stuff was because of the character to character moments, and we get a lot of that here. So, man, this series really is a step up from what it was previously. Another thing to add to that is with, of course, our main character Kaneki and his relationship with Toka. The last time I talked about it, I said it did suck how abrupt it was from the shift between Toka and Kaneki's feelings towards each other, but the end result, I understand what they're doing. And here, it's great, right? We kind of slowly pick up where we leave off, but there is a lot of gap before we could finally get to see these characters really talk to each other. And the way it's being done here was really good, because Toka understands what Kaneki needs to do. She understands how broken he is, and that he really needs to understand more of himself and exactly what he's doing before she can go there to help him. Just give that little push. And then even post what their conversation about their feelings were, that stuff was great too. And it really fits with the tone of the series overall. There are other relationships that do form or are brought up, but they're not really as fleshed out as one would expect in a shonen magazine. But I think that's just because the characters understand the weight on their shoulders and what they have to do. The responsibilities outweigh their leisure time into developing these kind of relationships, so we don't explore it that much. And by having that mature take on it, and both characters in a relationship understand that, it feels different from what we usually expect, but it's different in a great way. So in here, we also get more exploration and depth into the lore and just characters that kind of popped up here and there, and we expand a lot, and it gets expanded more. And man, I gotta say, I was surprised by a couple twists and turns that we got, some reveals of characters and who they were with the name drops, because there are some that return that I didn't think were even gonna come back. They didn't feel important at all for the rest of the story. They were important for certain arcs, but that was about it. And for them to come back and get woven into the story itself was done great. The pacing is fantastic. The pacing for the most part of the series is fantastic. I will say at the end, it sort of falls apart a little bit, but I just think it's because of how Ishida handled the ending. Because, like I said, we have a new antagonist, and he sort of shifts this story into a direction that you kind of see every now and then in a story like this. Usually it's not received well, and you kind of step back and say, oh, I mean, we were going to go this route, huh? That's interesting. And I think for me here, it's fine. I think the reason some people would hate how it ends is because it feels forced and almost sudden to getting where we're at in between the relations between humans and ghouls. And I think that's fine, because what's really important is the character-to-character moments that happen between this, the way characters violently react or the way they break down, and, you know, they really have to sit there and try to understand exactly what needs to be done. And just seeing everybody else do their part and be surprised by certain people they're close with actually choose the option that they didn't expect they would. It's really about coming together and defeating this common goal that they have. And that's probably where people kind of put off, because we get to that point really fast, and there was a lot more stuff that we could have done before we got to that moment in the final arc here. So overall, I think Tokyo Ghoul RE is solid. I would definitely recommend checking this one out. And on the last episode, I said I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about Tokyo Ghoul, because that was one half, and we knew for sure we were going to get a second half. So now, after going through the whole thing, I would say, yeah, this series is worth checking out for sure. It's a long journey, but all the build-up is worth it at the end. Again, it's all about character breakdowns, figuring out their identity and what their purpose is in the positions that they're in. The epilogue was very wholesome, and I'm not gonna lie, it did go the direction I was hoping for, but when I was reading, I'm like, there's no way it's gonna go this route. We can't have a happy or even a decent ending in this kind of series. But it makes sense because again, the series is about self-identity and coming to terms with yourself and moving forward in a positive light. So it does fit that we get a happier ending than what you would probably expect from this series. And the last thing I gotta say, one of the best parts of this series as well is the fact that characters that you got invested in either series definitely have their own time to shine, whether it be them being important in a fight or just them completing their individual stories. Mainly because there's a lot of characters in here. There's so many more introduced in RE, and having to juggle all the important characters and having to juggle all of these characters in this story and making sure they all get their moment to shine is difficult. And yeah, I did just say that, everybody gets their time to finish their story arcs, and there are some that feel like they get put on the sideline, but I think that's because they don't have a story arc. These characters that feel like they're being sidelined they were more of just set pieces pushing other characters further into the story. One character is Toka's brother Ayato, and it does feel like it in the first series that, there's actually a lot more going on with him, but really he is just more of a push for Kaneki and Toka, as well as the face for the organization he was working with at the time. And then once we got into the bigger players of that, and Kaneki and Toka kind of moving forward because of certain things Ayato has mentioned or done, his role is essentially done in the story. There's another Ghoul, Banjo, who's good friends with Kaneki, who was one of the prime examples that Kaneki had of, man, ghouls, there really are good ghouls here. And that's really what he was. Like, he was just a push and a means to an end for certain things. And just becoming a supporting cast, there's really nothing else for him to really do other than, hey, I have this ability, I'm going to be using it, and I'll show up here and there. But that's kind of really it. But as far as characters that definitely have stories going on or were being developed in RE specifically, and they definitely get closure for the most part, whether that means that they come to terms with what's going on, and that really just means them coming to terms with themselves and the role they have to play here. So again, great series. I definitely recommend it. And I will be looking forward to what Ishida does next. So alright guys, thanks for sticking around, checking out this episode. What are your thoughts on Tokyo Ghoul RE and the series as a whole? Would love to hear your thoughts, and you can send those to unversedpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, we'll bring that up on the next episode. And then you could follow us on social media at Unversed Podcast anywhere you go, and we'll let you know when those episodes drop. So thank you again, guys. We'll catch you on the next one.